brave girl dreams this 6 times in a row and has a terrifying message. The whispers from the dark. The screams shattered the peaceful Sunday morning like broken glass. I was in my office grading papers when I heard them echoing from the church's children's wing. By the time I reached the Sunday school classroom, Sarah Matthews was convulsing on the floor, her small body twisting unnaturally as she shrieked words that no 10-year-old should know. The throne, she screamed, her eyes rolling back. It's made of people. They're all screaming, but no one can hear them. Pastor James was already kneeling beside her, his weathered hand steady as he tried to comfort her. But it was my daughter Lily's reaction that froze my blood. She stood in the corner, clutching her stuffed bear, the last gift from her mother, her face drained of all color. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She sees him too." Before I could reach her, Lily's eyes rolled back and she collapsed. As I caught her falling body, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles on the altar. The other children huddled together, their prayers mixing with sobs. Through the stained glass windows, the morning sun cast blood-red shadows across the floor. Sarah's screams had turned to whispers now, Latin words spilling from her lips in a voice that wasn't her own. Pastor James began to pray, his strong voice carrying above the chaos, "The Lord is my shepherd." But as I held my unconscious daughter, I noticed something that made my heart stop. Catherine's silver cross necklace around Lily's neck was burning hot, leaving an angry red mark on her skin. The same necklace my late wife had warned me about in her final days, when she spoke of dreams and prophecies I'd been too rational to believe. Now, as both girls seized in perfect synchronization, I realized with growing horror that my wife's nightmares were coming true. If this tale of supernatural terror and a mother's prophecy has gripped your soul, delve deeper into our world of spine-chilling stories by subscribing. Each week we unravel new mysteries that blur the line between faith and darkness. Join our growing community of believers. Teaching literature had always been my way of making sense of the world. For 15 years I stood before my high school students at St. Mary's Academy, dissecting Shakespeare's metaphors and Dickens' social commentary, finding comfort in the logical progression of narrative structures. That was before Catherine died, before the rational world I'd built around myself began to crumble. I'm Michael Thompson, though my students call me Mr. T, a nickname that always made Catherine laugh. 2 years ago, she left us after a brief but brutal battle with brain cancer. The doctors called it glioblastoma. I called it the thief that stole my wife and my daughter's mother in just 6 months. Before the cancer, I was the kind of man who found solace in reason. My father was a physics professor, my mother a chemist. Faith wasn't part of our vocabulary. Catherine was different. She taught Sunday school at our local church, believed in angels, and insisted on saying grace before every meal. I loved her for it, even if I didn't understand it. She balanced my skepticism with her unwavering faith, and somehow we made it work. Our daughter Lily inherited her mother's spiritual sensitivity. Even at 10, she sees the world through Catherine's eyes, full of wonder and divine possibility. She has her mother's golden hair, her gentle smile, and that same inexplicable connection to things I can't see or understand. When Catherine was dying, she spoke of dreams, vivid, terrifying visions that she insisted weren't just products of her medication. She would wake up screaming about a throne made of suffering souls, about a darkness coming for the children. I dismissed it as the tumor talking. The rational part of me, the part that believed only in what could be proven or explained, couldn't accept her warnings. The last thing she did before slipping into her final coma was press her silver cross necklace into my hands. "Give this to Lily when the dreams start," she whispered. "She'll need it more than I do." I nodded, not understanding, wanting only to comfort her in what I thought was tumor-induced delirium. Now I teach my classes mechanically, going through the motions of analyzing text while my mind wanders to darker places. My colleagues whisper about me in the teacher's lounge, the widower who's lost his passion for literature, who jumps at unexpected sounds, who started attending church regularly despite years of proud atheism. They don't know about the diary I found in Catherine's things, filled with prophecies that make my blood run cold. They haven't seen the drawings Lily makes in her sleep, images that match her mother's final visions with terrifying accuracy. They can't understand why I've started carrying a small Bible in my jacket pocket, or why I flinch every time the church bells ring at 3 a.m. The rational man I used to be would have laughed at what I've become, a father desperately searching for answers in ancient texts and prayer books, trying to protect his daughter from something he can't see or understand. But that man died with Catherine, and in his place stands someone else, someone who's beginning to realize that perhaps not everything in this world can be explained by logic and reason. And now, as I watch my daughter and her best friend Sarah becoming entangled in something dark and incomprehensible, I can't help but wonder if Catherine was trying to warn us about this very moment. If only I had listened. If only I had believed. Lily and Sarah met in the church nursery as toddlers, their bond forming over shared cookies and Sunday school songs. They were inseparable from the start, finding in each other what Catherine used to call a mirror of souls. Sarah's mother, Rachel Matthews, became a pillar of support after Catherine's death, stepping in to help with everything from school pickups to holiday dinners. Sarah's family lives 3 houses down from us, their white colonial home a mirror image of ours. Her father, David, is a pediatrician at the local hospital, another man of science who, like me, found his worldview challenged by inexplicable events. Rachel runs the church's youth ministry and has always treated Lily like a second daughter. They are the kind of neighbors who become family, their presence a constant comfort in the void Catherine left behind. The girls share more than just friendship. Both were born on the same day, during a rare solar eclipse that Catherine always said made them special. They have the same delicate features, though Sarah's dark curls contrast with Lily's golden hair. They finish each other's sentences, share the same inexplicable fears, and often dream the same dreams, a connection that once seemed charming but now fills me with dread. After Catherine died, Sarah was the only one who could make Lily smile. They would spend hours in our backyard treehouse, whispering secrets and creating elaborate fantasy worlds. Sarah would sleep over almost every weekend, and on the nights when Lily would wake up crying for her mother, Sarah would hold her hand and sing the hymns Catherine used to love. But things began to change 2 months ago. The girls started withdrawing from their other friends, spending long hours drawing strange symbols in their notebooks. Their once bright eyes became shadowed with exhaustion, and their playful giggles gave way to hushed conversations that would stop whenever adults came near. Rachel noticed it too. We would sit on her porch watching them play, sharing worried glances when they would suddenly freeze mid-game, their heads tilted as if listening to something only they could hear. The treehouse became less a place of imagination and more a sanctuary where they would hide, emerging only when called repeatedly for dinner. Their teachers at St. Mary's reported changes in their behavior. Both straight as students, they began to struggle with concentration. Their artwork in class took a dark turn, landscapes filled with shadowy figures and recurring images of what looked like a throne made of intertwined bodies. When questioned, they would simply say they were drawing their dreams. The connection between them has grown stronger but also darker. They move in perfect synchronization, finish each other's sentences with increasing frequency, and seem to communicate without words. Last week I found them in the church garden at dusk, holding hands and reciting what sounded like Latin, a language neither of them has studied. As I watch them now, huddled together on the church steps after Sunday service, I see both the innocent children they were and something else, something that makes my skin crawl. They're drawing again, their pencils moving in mirror images across their notebooks. When the wind blows the pages open, I glimpse what looks like Catherine's face surrounded by flames and thorns. The rational part of me wants to dismiss it all, the drawings, the synchronized behavior, the strange languages. But I remember Catherine's words in her final days, the children will see it first. They'll be the ones to warn us. Looking at Lily and Sarah now, I can't help but wonder if that warning has already begun. The first night it happened was deceptively ordinary. I had just finished grading papers in my study, the mundane task of correcting grammar providing a brief escape from my growing concerns. Lily had gone to bed early, exhausted from a day spent at Sarah's bedside in the hospital. The doctors couldn't explain Sarah's sudden collapse during Sunday school, chalking it up to stress and possible seizures. I remember checking my phone 11:47 p.m. and thinking I should try to sleep. But something kept me at my desk, a nagging feeling that had been growing stronger since finding Catherine's diary earlier that day. Her last entries were filled with frantic warnings about dreams and children, words I had dismissed as the ramblings of a dying woman. The house creaked and settled around me, its familiar sound somehow more ominous in the late-night quiet. Through the window I could see the Matthews house, dark except for Sarah's bedroom light. Rachel had texted earlier to say she was finally sleeping, the first real rest since her collapse. The first scream came at exactly 3 a.m. I know because I was staring at my phone when it happened, reading through old text messages from Catherine. The sound froze my blood not just because of its intensity, but because it came from two directions at once. Lily's room above me, and through my phone, Rachel's panicked voice telling me Sarah was screaming too. I ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, my heart pounding against my ribs. Lily was sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide and unseeing, her small body rigid. The throne, she whispered, in a voice that wasn't quite her own. He's building it with their pain. When I tried to touch her, her skin was ice cold. She turned to look at me, but her eyes didn't focus on my face. Instead, she seemed to be staring at something behind me, something that made her whole body tremble. "Daddy," she whispered. Mommy tried to warn us, she saw it too. My phone was buzzing constantly now, Rachel's increasingly frantic messages telling me Sarah was saying the exact same things, word for word, in perfect synchronization with Lily. Impossible, I thought. And yet. Then Lily spoke again, this time in perfect Latin language she'd never studied. Sedis ex animibus innocentium, a throne made from innocent souls. The same phrase one had found scribbled in Catherine's diary just hours earlier, hidden among her last fevered writings. And the temperature in the room plummeted. The digital clock by Lily's bed flickered and died, and then she began to describe what she was seeing, details that matched Catherine's final prophecies with terrifying accuracy. The man with shifting faces. The throne built from suffering. The coming darkness that would start with the children. "He says you should have listened to her," Lily said, her voice dropping to a guttural whisper. "He says it's too late now." The cross necklace around her neck, Catherine's cross, began to glow with an intense heat. Lily didn't seem to notice the burn it was leaving on her skin, but I could smell the sharp scent of singed flesh. Then, as suddenly as it began, she collapsed back onto her pillows. The room temperature returned to normal. My phone buzzed one final time, Rachel telling me Sarah had lost consciousness at the exact same moment. I sat there in the darkness, holding my daughter's cold hand, the rational part of my mind desperately trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But there was no logical explanation for this perfect synchronization between the girls, no scientific reason for Lily to know words her mother had written in private. As I watched her sleep, my eyes fell on Catherine's diary on the bedside table. With trembling hands, I opened it to the last page, where her normally neat handwriting had become a frantic scrawl. "The dreams are only the beginning. When they start, give her my cross. And Michael, believe them. Please believe them this time." I touched the burn mark on Lily's neck, still hot under my fingers, and felt the last pieces of my rational worldview crumble away. Whatever was happening to our children, Catherine had seen it coming. And I had been too blind, too stubborn, too rational to listen. The morning after Lily's first nightmare, I called in sick to school for the first time in 15 years. The house felt different, heavier somehow, as if the events of the night had left a tangible weight in the air. Lily was still sleeping, her small body curled around her mother's old stuffed bear, the burn mark from the cross now a perfect oval on her neck. I found myself drawn to Catherine's study, a room I'd avoided since her death. It remained exactly as she'd left it, half-graded Sunday school papers on the desk, her favorite cardigan draped over the chair, the wall calendar still showing the month she died. The air was stale, thick with dust and memories. The diary had been hidden inside a hollow Bible, a hiding place so obvious I'd missed it for 2 years. It was bound in worn leather, its pages filled with Catherine's elegant handwriting. The early entries were ordinary enough grocery lists, sermon notes, ideas for Sunday school lessons. But about 6 months before her diagnosis, the tone changed dramatically. But the dream started again last night. One entry read, "The same dark figure, the same message. The children will be first. I see Lily and Sarah in these dreams, standing before something terrible, something wearing a crown of shadows. I have to protect them, but how do you fight something that hasn't happened yet?" My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Entry after entry described visions that matched what Lily and Sarah had experienced: the throne made of suffering souls, the man with shifting faces, the Latin phrases. Catherine had documented everything with scientific precision, including dates, times, and correlations with biblical prophecies. The final entries became increasingly urgent, written in a shaky hand as the tumor progressed. Michael won't believe me. He thinks it's the medication, the tumor pressing against my brain. But I'm more lucid now than I've ever been. The veil between worlds is thinning, and something is waiting to step through. It will start with the children's dreams. Always the children. Found another reference in Revelations. The signs are all there: the solar eclipse when the girls were born, the marks appearing on their hands. Must remember to tell Rachel to check Sarah's palms, the way they finish each other's sentences now. They're being prepared for something. God, please don't let me die before I can warn them. The last entry was dated the day before she slipped into her final coma. No more time. The darkness is coming, but there's still hope. The cross will protect Lily, blessed by something stronger than evil. Sarah and Lily together, their connection is the key. Michael, if you're reading this, remember what I told you about the power of innocent faith. The children will see the truth first. Believe them, love them, protect them, and when the time comes, let them fight. Below this was a series of biblical references hastily scribbled. Isaiah 11:6, a little child shall lead them. Psalms 8:2, out of the mouth of babes ... ordained strength. Matthew 18:3, except ye become as little children. My academic mind wanted to rationalize it all, to dismiss it as the desperate writings of a dying woman. But I couldn't ignore the precision of her predictions, the way every detail matched what was happening now. Phrases the girls had spoken in their synchronized nightmares appeared word for word in entries written years before. The last page contained a letter addressed to me. My dearest Michael, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Your rational mind will want to dismiss everything in these pages. Don't. The girls need you to believe. What's coming is beyond science, beyond reason. It can only be fought with faith, not just in God, but in the power of innocent souls to recognize and resist evil. The cross I gave Lily isn't just jewelry. It's a beacon, a protection, blessed by something older than churches. Keep it with her. Watch for the signs I've listed. And Michael, it's okay to be afraid. Just don't let fear blind you to the truth again. All my love. Catherine. I closed the diary, my worldview shattered. Outside, church bells began to toll, and somewhere in the house I heard Lily beginning to stir. The second night was approaching, and this time I would be ready to believe. The meeting in Pastor James's office was not what I expected. Instead of the warm, sunlit space where he usually counseled parishioners, we gathered in the church basement. Rachel Matthews sat beside me, her hands trembling around a cup of untouched coffee. David stood by the door, his doctor's composure cracking as he described Sarah's deteriorating condition at the hospital. It's not just Sarah and Lily anymore, Pastor James began, his weathered face grave in the fluorescent light. We've received calls from 6 other churches in the diocese, all reporting the same thing: children having synchronized nightmares, speaking in tongues, drawing the same images. He spread photographs across his desk, children's drawings from different churches, all showing the same terrible throne, the same shadowy figure with shifting faces. My breath caught as I recognized the style identical to Lily's recent artwork. This came from St. Michael's in Boston. He pointed to one drawing. This from a small parish in Maine. And this, he paused, pulling out a yellowed sketch, was found in our church archives, dated 1923. During another time when children started having visions. Rachel gasped. The century-old drawing could have been drawn by Sarah yesterday, the same throne, the same dark figure, even the Latin phrases around the edges. What happened to those children, she whispered. Pastor James's silence was answer enough. There's more, he continued finally. Every church reporting these incidents had something in common. Each had recently lost a deeply faithful member, someone who reported having prophetic dreams before their death. Like Catherine, I thought, my chest tightening. But this time is different, Pastor James said, pulling out an ancient leather-bound book. Because this time we were warned. This time we have Catherine's prophecies. He opened the book, revealing pages of archaic text and illustrations. This is a 17th century account of a similar occurrence in England. The children's visions were dismissed as hysteria until it was too late. But one priest documented everything, including a prophecy about the next occurrence, our time. His finger traced the faded text, when the innocent see darkness twice crowned, when mothers beyond the veil cry warning, when faith and doubt birth twin flames, then comes the final battle for souls. David scoffed, his doctor's rationality rebelling. You can't seriously believe. Your daughter spoke perfect Aramaic during her last episode, Pastor James interrupted. A dialect that hasn't been spoken in 2,000 years. Tell me, Dr. Matthews, what's your medical explanation for that? Before David could respond, the church bells began to toll. We all checked our watches. 3 p.m. The temperature in the room plunged suddenly, our breath visible in the cold air. Then we heard children's voices singing, but not from above in the church. The sound came from beneath us, beyond the basement walls, as if rising from the very earth. A hymn I recognized from Catherine's funeral, but twisted wrong somehow. Pastor James moved quickly, pulling out a small box from his desk. Inside was a collection of crosses, each similar to the one Catherine had given Lily. These were left by the previous witnesses, he explained. Each blessed, each protecting a child who saw the darkness coming. You knew, I accused, anger rising. You knew what Catherine was seeing was real. I suspected, he admitted. But Catherine made me promise not to tell you until you were ready to believe. She said you would know when the time came, when the girl started sharing dreams. Rachel was crying now, silent tears tracking down her face. How do we protect them? We don't, Pastor James said softly. They protect us. That's what Catherine understood. The children aren't the victims in this story, they're the warriors. Their innocent faith, their ability to see truth without adult doubt clouding their vision. That's what the darkness fears. He handed each of us a cross. Catherine spent her last months preparing for this. She blessed these herself, infused them with a mother's love, the strongest protection there is. The singing grew louder, and now we could make out the words, an ancient warning sung in children's voices. When darkness wears a crown of light. When evil speaks with tongues of truth. The children's dreams will pierce the night, and faith shall be our sword of proof. I clutched Catherine's diary in one hand, the cross in the other, as Pastor James began to pray. The fluorescent lights flickered and died, leaving us in darkness broken only by the faint glow of the blessed crosses. Catherine wrote that the children would need guides, Pastor James said, in the darkness. Adults who could set aside their doubt and stand with them. The question is, are we ready to believe? Above us, the church bells continued to toll, though it was well past 3 p.m. And somewhere in the hospital, I knew Sarah would be waking up, sharing another vision with Lily, a vision of what was coming and what we would all have to become to face it. That night, I sat in Lily's room, Catherine's diary open in my lap, waiting for what I knew would come. The blessed cross gleamed at my daughter's throat as she slept fitfully, her small hands clutching her mother's old stuffed bear. The digital clock read 2:57 a.m. The first sign wasn't a sound or a sight, but a scent, Catherine's lavender perfume, subtle but unmistakable. Then came the cold, different from the supernatural chill we'd experienced before. This was the gentle cool of early spring mornings when Catherine would tend her garden. Michael. Her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and there she was, not the gaunt figure from her final days, but Catherine as she'd been before the cancer, radiant and whole. She stood by Lily's bed, a soft light emanating from her form. You're finally ready to see, she said, her voice carrying the same gentle strength I remembered. I tried so hard to make you understand before. Catherine, I whispered, reaching out before catching myself. I'm sorry, I should have believed you. She smiled sadly. The rational mind struggles with truth it cannot measure, but now you see with your heart, not just your eyes. A whimper from Lily drew our attention. She was beginning to stir, caught in the beginning of another nightmare. Catherine moved to her side, placing an ethereal hand on our daughter's forehead. The darkness found them first because they're special, she explained. Lily and Sarah born during an eclipse when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Their connection isn't just friendship, it's divine purpose. What's happening to them, I asked, watching as Lily calmed under her mother's touch. They're being shown what's coming. The enemy knows children see truth clearly, unclouded by adult doubts and compromises. He wants to break them before they understand their strength. As if on cue, Lily's eyes snapped open, but this time they focused directly on Catherine. "Mommy," she whispered. "I'm here," sweetheart, Catherine said softly. "I've always been here." Lily sat up, tears streaming down her face. "The man with changing faces, he said you couldn't help us. He said you were gone forever." "The father of lies tells many stories," Catherine replied, her form becoming more solid as she sat on the bed. "But a mother's love is stronger than death. That's why he fears it." The room filled with a warm light as Catherine gathered Lily in her arms, a real embrace, solid and true. I watched in awe as our daughter clung to her mother, their shared tears glowing like diamonds in the supernatural light. "The cross," Catherine said, touching the silver at Lily's throat. "It burns because it's doing its job. Evil cannot touch you while you wear it, but the real protection isn't the metal, it's the love it carries." Lily touched the burn mark on her neck. "Sarah needs one too. She's so scared, Mommy. We both see him every night." "Sarah has her own protection now," Catherine assured her. "Pastor James gave it to her parents today, but your connection, that's the real shield. Together you're stronger than any darkness." The clock struck 3 a.m., but instead of the usual cold dread, the room filled with a gentle warmth. Catherine looked at me, her eyes full of the wisdom that comes from seeing beyond the veil. "Michael, they'll need you to be strong. When the darkness comes, and it's coming soon, the children will face it first. You must help them hold on to their faith, their innocence. That's what evil wants to destroy." "How?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How do I protect her from something I barely understand?" Catherine's form began to fade, but her voice remained clear. "With love, Michael. The same love that lets me break through the veil to be here now. Perfect love casts out fear. Remember that." She kissed Lily's forehead, leaving a mark that glowed briefly before fading. "I'll be watching, my darlings. When the nightmares come, look for me in the light." As she faded away, Catherine's voice echoed one last time. "The darkness thinks it can use the children's innocence against them. But it doesn't understand their innocent faith is what makes them powerful. Stand with them, Michael. Stand and believe." The lavender scent lingered as Lily fell back asleep, a peaceful smile on her face for the first time in days. I touched the place where Catherine had been sitting. The blanket was still warm. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Something incredible just happened. Sarah's talking about seeing Catherine, says she has a message for us." I looked at our daughter, sleeping peacefully under the protection of her mother's eternal love, and felt the last of my doubts fall away. Catherine had transcended death itself to protect our children. How could I do any less? The battle was coming, but we wouldn't face it alone. Sometimes I realized the most rational choice is to believe in the impossible. The following weeks brought a wave of incidents that could no longer be ignored. What started with Lily and Sarah spread through our community like wildfire. Children across 3 counties reported identical nightmares, drew the same haunting images, and spoke in ancient languages they couldn't possibly know. At St. Mary's Academy, where I taught, the changes were impossible to miss. The elementary wing became a place of whispered conversations and fearful glances. Children who once played tag at recess now stood in circles holding hands and singing hymns in perfect harmony, hymns that hadn't been sung in centuries. Pastor James organized nightly prayer groups, but they quickly evolved into something more. Parents brought their children's drawings, their recorded sleep talking, their fever-scribed prophecies. Each piece matched Catherine's predictions with terrifying accuracy. The church basement became a war room of sorts, its walls covered with children's artwork documenting the approaching darkness. Dr. Matthews David tried to maintain his scientific skepticism, but even he couldn't explain what was happening at his hospital. The pediatric ward, filled with children suffering from unexplainable symptoms, burn marks in the shape of ancient symbols, sudden ability to read biblical Hebrew, synchronized seizures that occurred precisely at 3 a.m. The medical equipment goes haywire when it happens, he confessed during one late-night meeting. Every monitor in the ward flatlines for exactly 33 seconds. Then they all restart simultaneously, showing perfect readings. It's impossible. Rachel organized the mothers into prayer circles, each wearing one of the blessed crosses Pastor James had distributed. They took turns keeping vigil at the hospital, at schools, at playgrounds. Their prayers seemed to provide some protection. The children slept more peacefully when the mothers were near. But it was Lily and Sarah who remained at the center of it all. Their connection deepened in ways that defied explanation. They moved in perfect synchronization, completed each other's sentences, and shared not just dreams but thoughts. When Sarah was moved to the hospital's isolation ward for observation, Lily could describe every test they performed, every word spoken, without leaving her bed. I found myself spending hours in Catherine's study, poring over her diary and the ancient texts Pastor James had provided. The prophecy spoke of twin flames born of faith and doubt. Sarah, daughter of a devoted mother and skeptical father; Lily, daughter of a faithful mother and a father who had to learn to believe. Their dual nature made them perfect conduits for what was coming. The children's artwork became more detailed, more disturbing. The throne of suffering souls gained definition. Faces could be recognized, some of them belonging to people still living. The figure with shifting faces appeared more frequently, and now he wore a crown that seemed to be made of light and shadow intertwined. One evening, as I was documenting another set of drawings, Lily appeared in my study doorway. Her eyes were clear but held a wisdom no 10-year-old should possess. "He's building it here, Daddy," she said quietly. "The throne. It's not just in our dreams anymore. Every time someone chooses darkness over light, every time someone turns away from love, it gets stronger." "Who's building it, sweetheart?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. "He has many names," she replied, "but he wants us to call him Father. He says our innocent souls will make his crown complete." That night, during the prayer meeting, something changed. As the mothers prayed, their crosses began to glow with the same light we'd seen emanating from Catherine's spirit. The children, who usually sat quietly during these sessions, suddenly stood as one. In perfect unison, they began to recite a passage none of them should have known. "When darkness wears the crown of light, when evil speaks with tongues of truth, the children's dreams will pierce the night, and faith shall be our sword of proof." Then Lily and Sarah stepped forward, their joined hands radiating a soft light. Sarah spoke first, her voice carrying an authority that silenced the room. "The throne is almost complete." Lily continued, "But he doesn't understand. Our innocent souls aren't his to take." Together, they delivered the message that would change everything the mothers beyond the veil are gathering. They're teaching us how to fight. When darkness thinks it's won, that's when the real battle begins. Pastor James documented everything, his hands shaking as he wrote. The prophecies were unfolding exactly as Catherine had predicted, but with a twist none of us had expected. The children weren't just witnesses to the approaching darkness, they were being prepared to fight it. As I drove home that night, Lily sleeping peacefully in the back seat, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The streetlights were casting double shadows, one normal, one that seemed to reach upward, forming the shape of a throne. We were running out of time. The very fabric of reality was beginning to tear, and our children stood at the center of it all. The question was no longer whether we believed, it was whether our belief would be enough to protect them when the darkness finally broke through. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday evening as I was organizing Catherine's research materials with Rachel. We'd been sorting through boxes of her old papers in the church basement, looking for any additional clues she might have left behind. That's when we found a hidden compartment in her old teaching Bible containing a USB drive and a handwritten note for when the children start speaking in tongues. The drive contained years of meticulous research. Catherine hadn't just been a Sunday school teacher, she'd been conducting a secret investigation into similar incidents throughout history. Her digital files were organized with academic precision, cross-referencing supernatural events with biblical prophecies and historical records. "Look at this," Rachel whispered, pointing to a document dated 6 months before Catherine's diagnosis. She found a pattern. Every 100 years, almost to the day, children across different continents reported identical visions. Each time it was preceded by a solar eclipse and followed by a period of unprecedented darkness. The files included scanned pages from medieval manuscripts, newspaper clippings from the 1920s, and personal accounts from religious leaders worldwide. All described the same phenomena we were witnessing now: children speaking ancient languages, drawing the throne of souls, receiving warnings about a crown of light and shadow. But Catherine had discovered something else, something that made my hands shake as I read her notes. Each historical incident had ended differently, depending on how the adults responded to the children's warnings. In communities where the children were dismissed or medicated, tragedy followed. But in places where they were believed and supported, something extraordinary happened. The children's innocent faith Catherine had written acts as a lens, focusing divine light against the darkness. But they need anchors, adults willing to set aside doubt and stand with them. The more we believe, the stronger their light becomes. Her research led to an ancient prophecy, pieced together from sources across different faiths. When the deceiver wears light as his crown, when pure souls are gathered for his throne, the children shall see what others deny, and mothers beyond death shall guard their own. Twin flames of faith and doubt combined shall light the way for all to see. What was broken shall be restored, when innocent hearts set truth free. Catherine had annotated every line, connecting them to current events and biblical references. She'd identified the twin flames years before Lily and Sarah, born during an eclipse, each to parents representing faith and doubt. She'd even predicted the exact date the visions would begin. But it was her final entry that chilled me to the bone. Written just days before her death, the words barely legible. "They're calling me now. The mothers who came before, who watch from beyond the veil. They've shown me what's coming, how the deceiver will try to use our children's innocent souls to build his kingdom. But they've also shown me how to fight back. Michael, when you read this, remember, a mother's love transcends death. We're gathering, preparing. The children aren't alone. We fight beside them, invisible but present. Look for the signs, flowers blooming out of season, lights that cast no shadow, songs heard on windless nights. We're here." Rachel and I worked through the night digitizing everything, sending copies to Pastor James and other trusted allies. Catherine had built a network of believers, preparing them for this moment. Her research included practical steps for supporting the children, prayer circles at specific times, symbols of protection, even musical notes for hymns that strengthened their resistance. She knew Rachel whispered as dawn approached. She knew she wouldn't be here physically, but she found a way to help them anyway. The most crucial discovery was Catherine's analysis of how the darkness operated. It didn't attack with obvious evil, but with subtle deception. It wore light as a disguise, spoke half-truths, and offered false comfort. The children could see through the masquerade because their faith was pure, uncomplicated by adult rationalizations. As if confirming our discovery, every cross in the room began to glow softly. The temperature dropped, and that familiar scent of lavender filled the air. On the wall, children's drawings began to shift, the throne transforming into something else, a barrier of light, formed by countless mothers standing guard over their children. Catherine's final message appeared on my computer screen, though the power was off. "Now you understand. The battle isn't just spiritual, it's personal. Every mother who ever loved a child stands with us. Every pure soul strengthens our light. The darkness thinks it can use innocence as a weapon, but it doesn't understand. Innocence protected by love is the strongest force in creation." We had the blueprint for resistance. Catherine had left us everything we needed. Now we just had to help the children hold on until the moment she'd predicted, when darkness, thinking itself victorious, would find itself surrounded by a light it couldn't comprehend. The war for innocent souls was about to begin, and thanks to Catherine's foresight, we wouldn't be fighting blind. It began at sunset on a Sunday, exactly 100 days after the first nightmare. The air grew thick and heavy, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Across town, every church bell began to toll, though no one was ringing them. Children everywhere in homes, hospitals, parks stopped whatever they were doing and turned their faces toward an unseen light. I was at the church with Pastor James when it started. Lily and Sarah were sitting in the front pew, drawing as they always did now, when suddenly their pencils dropped in perfect synchronization. "He's here," they whispered together, their voices carrying an otherworldly resonance. The stained glass windows began to vibrate, their colors shifting and swirling in impossible patterns. Outside, we could hear cars stopping, horns honking, and then silence. Complete, absolute silence, broken only by the sound of children's voices raised in an ancient hymn none of them had been taught. "Get the crosses," Pastor James commanded, rushing to unlock the cabinet where we kept Catherine's blessed relics. But before we could reach them, every light in the church exploded, showering us with sparks that didn't burn. Through the darkness, I saw Lily and Sarah standing, their joined hands emanating a soft blue light. Around them, other children began to rise from their seats, moving with that same synchronized grace we'd come to fear and marvel at. Their eyes were focused on something the adults couldn't see, something that made them both smile and tremble. "The throne is complete," Lily announced, her voice echoing with others, hundreds, thousands of children's voices speaking as one. "He comes wearing light as his crown." The temperature plunged. Frost formed on the windows, creating patterns that looked like screaming faces. The children began to move, forming a circle in the center of the church. Their shadows, cast by some unseen light, stretched up the walls, forming the shape of a massive throne. Then we saw it, or rather saw him, a figure of pure light, beautiful and terrible, standing before the children. His face was constantly shifting, wearing the features of everyone we loved and trusted. When he spoke, his voice was honey and poison. "My dear children," he said, each word releasing pulses of light that made the adults fall to their knees. "You've seen my throne. You've heard my call. Your innocent souls will make my kingdom perfect." But something was different this time. The children didn't cower or scream. Led by Lily and Sarah, they joined hands, forming an unbroken circle around the figure of light. "We see you," they said in unison. "We see what you really are." The being's light flickered, its beautiful facade cracking for a moment to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. "You are children," it said, its voice hardening. "You are mine to shape, mine to guide." "We are his children," they responded, and their voices were joined by others' invisible voices, thousands of them, singing from beyond the veil. "And our mothers are watching." The air filled with the scent of flowers, lavender, roses, jasmine, the favorite flowers of mothers long past. The temperature began to rise, not with hellish heat, but with the warmth of a mother's embrace. I felt Catherine's presence before I saw her, but this time she wasn't alone. Transparent figures filled the church mothers from every era, every culture, their forms radiating pure, unconditional love. They moved to stand behind their children, placing spectral hands on small shoulders. The being of light snarled, its disguise crumbling further. "This is impossible. Death is a barrier. You cannot interfere." "A mother's love knows no barriers," Catherine's voice rang out, echoing with countless others. "We warned you. Every time you've tried this, in every age we've warned you. Love is stronger than death." The children began to sing again, but this time the hymn was different, not an ancient dirge, but something new, something that spoke of hope and light and unshakable faith. Every note seemed to pierce the being's false radiance. "The throne isn't for you," Lily and Sarah declared, their voices carrying the weight of divine truth. "It was never for you. You built it with pain, but we fill it with love." The being lunged forward, its beautiful disguise gone now, revealing its true form, a writhing mass of shadows wearing a crown of stolen light. But as it reached for the children, something extraordinary happened. Every cross in the building began to glow, not with the harsh light of the deceiver, but with a soft, persistent radiance that felt like hope made visible. The children's circle tightened, their joined hands creating a barrier of pure faith. And behind them stood the mothers, an army of love that stretched beyond the limits of life and death. Catherine stood directly behind Lily and Sarah, her form the clearest of all, her face set in determined lines. "You forgot the most important truth," she said to the darkness. "These innocent souls you covet, they were never unprotected. Every child is born from love, sealed with it, shielded by it. You can't take what was never yours to claim." The battle was only beginning, but in that moment, watching my daughter stand firm against darkness itself, supported by an endless chain of maternal love, I understood what Catherine had been preparing us for all along. The real miracle wasn't just the children's ability to see truth, it was the way love could transcend every barrier, even death itself, to protect what was precious. The night was long, and darkness had only begun to show its true face. But we were ready now. Ready to believe, ready to stand, ready to fight with a power as old as creation itself, the power of innocent faith protected by endless love. The confrontation in the church was only the beginning. As the being of false light retreated, it struck out with desperate fury. Sarah collapsed first, her small body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. The monitors in her hospital room, where her physical form still lay, screamed into life as her heart stopped beating. Lily screamed, a sound of pure anguish that shattered every remaining window in the church. She tried to run to her friend, but invisible forces held her in place. The other children began to seize, their bodies jerking in synchronized agony as the darkness tried to claim its prize. "Choose," the being hissed, its voice now stripped of all beauty. "Surrender your soul freely, Lily, and I'll spare her. This is what sacrifice means. This is what love costs." I watched in horror as my daughter stood there, tears streaming down her face, her mother's cross burning white-hot against her chest. The choice was impossible, her soul or her best friend's life. But before Lily could respond, Catherine's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Show her, sisters. Show her what really happens when a pure soul crosses the veil." The air shimmered, and suddenly we could all see what was happening in the spiritual realm. Sarah's spirit had risen from her body, but she wasn't alone. She stood in a garden of light, surrounded by countless mothers, her own ancestors, stretching back generations. They formed a circle of protection around her, their love manifesting as shields of pure light. "You have no power here," Sarah's grandmother, who had passed years ago, declared. "This is not your realm to rule." The being's rage manifested as storms of shadow, but they broke against the wall of maternal love. Sarah's spirit turned to Lily, her voice carrying across both worlds. "I see everything now, Lily. Our dreams weren't warnings, they were preparation. Every nightmare showed us his lies. Every scary moment taught us to be brave. We don't have to choose." The darkness screamed in fury, sending waves of cold fear through the church. But Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "Our connection isn't his to break. The mother showed me love doesn't end at death. It gets stronger." Lily's face set in determination. The cross at her throat blazed with renewed intensity as she declared, "You tried to make us choose between love and life. But that's the biggest lie of all. Real love is life." The two girls, one in spirit and one in flesh, reached for each other across the divide. Where their hands met, a burst of pure light exploded outward, forcing the darkness back. Every mother's spirit in the church added their light to the girls' connection. I watched in awe as Sarah's spirit began to pulse with a familiar blue light, the same light that had surrounded Catherine during her visits. The being of darkness howled in frustration as it realized its mistake. In trying to separate the girls, it had only made their bond stronger. Now Catherine's voice rang out. "While the veil is thinnest, show him what innocent faith really means." Lily and Sarah began to sing a song I recognized from Catherine's research. The ancient hymn of protection, but transformed by their pure voices into something new. Other children joined in, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to weave light into physical form. The darkness tried one last desperate attack. Sarah's hospital monitors flatlined completely. Lily stumbled, blood trickling from her nose as she fought to maintain their connection. The being pressed its advantage. "You'll kill her, child. Her body can't survive this separation. Let her go. Accept my offer." But Sarah's spirit shone brighter. "I'm not afraid anymore. Perfect love casts out fear. Mommy taught me that. Show him, Lily. Show him what we learned." Together, their voices rose in a new declaration, not the dark prophecies from their dreams, but a truth they had discovered themselves. Where darkness seeks to break, love binds together. Where fear would separate, faith builds a bridge. No power of shadow can overcome. The light of innocent souls joined in love. The words carried power, not just spiritual but physical. Sarah's body in the hospital suddenly gasped, her heart restarting with supernatural strength. Her spirit, glowing with borrowed light from generations of mothers, began to descend back into her physical form. The being of darkness shrieked in rage and disbelief. "This isn't how it ends. The throne must be filled." "It is filled," the girls declared together. "Not with suffering, but with love. Not with stolen souls, but with freely given faith. Look." The shadows that had formed the throne of suffering began to transform. Each dark strand was replaced by a cord of light, each one representing a mother's love, a child's faith, a connection that transcended death itself. Sarah's spirit, fully reunited with her body, her vital signs stabilizing with a strength that would later baffle her doctors. Lily collapsed into my arms, exhausted but triumphant. The other children began to wake, their seizures ending as the darkness retreated. The being had lost its greatest weapon, the threat of separation. In trying to break the bonds of love, it had only proved how unbreakable they truly were. As the first light of dawn broke through the shattered windows, Catherine's presence enveloped us one last time. Remember this night. Remember that darkness can wear light as a disguise, but it can never understand or overcome the true light of innocent love. The battle wasn't over, but something fundamental had changed. The children had faced the darkness's greatest weapon, the fear of loss, and discovered that love truly was stronger than death. The victory in the church came at a terrible price. While Sarah's spirit had reconnected with her body, she didn't wake up. The doctors called it a coma, but we knew it was something more sinister. Her physical form lay in the hospital, breathing but unreachable, while her soul seemed caught between worlds. The darkness had retreated but not surrendered. It had left a poison in its wake, a creeping despair that affected everyone differently. Adults who had witnessed the supernatural confrontation began to doubt their memories, rationalizing what they'd seen until even the most convincing evidence seemed like mass hysteria. David Matthews, the doctor who had finally begun to believe, retreated into desperate scientific explanations. He filled Sarah's hospital room with monitors and specialists, trying to explain the inexplicable through brain waves and neural patterns. Rachel spent every moment by her daughter's bedside, reading Bible verses in a voice that grew more hollow with each passing day. The other children who had stood in that circle of protection fell into a deep depression. They stopped drawing, stopped singing, stopped playing. Their eyes held a haunted look, as if they'd seen too much truth too young. Parents reported nightmares, not the prophetic visions from before, but simple terrors of losing everyone they loved. Lily took it the hardest. The connection she shared with Sarah hadn't broken, but it had twisted into something painful. She could feel her friend's struggle, could sense her spirit trying to find its way back, but couldn't help her. The guilt consumed her. "I should have chosen differently," she whispered one night, her face buried in her mother's old pillow. "He offered me a choice, and I chose wrong." I tried to comfort her, to remind her of the truth we'd witnessed, but my words sounded hollow even to me. The darkness had planted seeds of doubt that grew like thorns around our hearts. Pastor James kept the church open day and night, but fewer people came. The blessed crosses that had glowed with such power now seemed like ordinary metal. The photographs and drawings that had documented everything began to fade, as if the truth itself was being erased. Catherine's presence, which had been so strong during the confrontation, became distant. The scent of lavender no longer filled the house. Lily's dreams, when she managed to sleep at all, were empty of her mother's comforting presence. The darkness had discovered a more subtle weapon than terror. It used doubt, guilt, and the very human tendency to question our most profound experiences. Each day that Sarah didn't wake up was another crack in our collective faith. I found myself sitting in Catherine's study late at night, rereading her diary until the words blurred together. Had we misunderstood everything? Had our desperate need to believe in something greater than ourselves led us to see patterns that weren't there? The medical bills for Sarah's care mounted, adding financial pressure to the Matthews' emotional burden. The community tried to help, but resources and hope drained away with each passing day. The local newspaper ran an article about mass hysteria at local church, making it harder for those who had witnessed the truth to hold on to their convictions. Even the weather seemed affected. A constant gray drizzle fell, washing away the last traces of summer. The church's broken windows, still unrepaired, let in cold drafts that chilled visitors to the bone. The garden where Catherine had tended her roses withered and died, despite being in full bloom just days before. 1 month after Sarah fell into her coma, Lily stopped speaking entirely. She would sit by her friend's hospital bed for hours, holding her hand, their joined fingers still bearing the faint burn marks from that night of power and light. The darkness hadn't needed to destroy us with a dramatic confrontation. It was winning through attrition, through the slow erosion of faith and hope. Each day without Sarah's smile, without Catherine's presence, without the children's songs of prophecy, was another small victory for doubt. We were losing something precious, not just Sarah, but our collective belief in the power of love to transcend death and the strength of innocent faith to overcome darkness. The question was no longer whether we could fight the darkness, but whether we could hold on to the light we'd seen long enough to find our way back. My own descent into darkness happened gradually, like a slow-setting sun. Each morning I would wake expecting to feel the certainty that had filled me during that night in the church, only to find it more distant, more dreamlike. The rational mind I'd fought so hard to silence began to reassert itself with devastating logic. I stopped attending the prayer meetings at church. The sight of those gathered few, desperately trying to recreate the power we'd witnessed, was more than I could bear. Pastor James would catch my eye across the school parking lot, but I would turn away, unable to face his unwavering faith when mine had crumbled so completely. The worst part was watching Lily withdraw into herself. My vibrant, loving daughter became a ghost in our home, moving silently through rooms that felt too big, too empty. She stopped wearing Catherine's cross, saying it no longer felt warm. The burn mark on her neck faded, leaving no trace of that supernatural night. One evening, as rain pounded against the windows, I found myself in Catherine's study again. The familiar scent of lavender had been replaced by the musty smell of old books and fading paper. Her diary lay open on the desk, but the words that had seemed so prophetic now read like the desperate hopes of a dying woman. "What am I supposed to believe?" I whispered into the empty room. "How can I help our daughter when I can't even trust my own memories?" The silence that answered was deafening. No spiritual presence, no motherly wisdom, no sign from beyond. Just the sound of rain and my own doubts echoing in my head. I began drinking more than I should, trying to blur the edges of reality that had become too sharp, too painful. My teaching suffered. Students who had once loved my passionate discussions about literature now faced a hollow-eyed man who moved through lessons mechanically. The breaking point came one night when I found Lily in the backyard, standing in the rain at 3 a.m., her face lifted to the sky. When I reached her, she turned to me with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much pain. "Daddy," she said, her voice rusty from disuse, "did we imagine it all? Did we want Mom to be there so badly that we made it all up?" I couldn't lie to her, but I couldn't bear to destroy whatever fragment of faith she still held. So I said nothing, just held her as the rain soaked us both, feeling like a failure as both a father and a believer. Later that night, I gathered everything: Catherine's diary, the research files, the drawings, the blessed cross, and shoved them into a box. I couldn't bring myself to throw them away, but I couldn't live with these daily reminders of what we'd lost, or what we'd imagined. The next day, I submitted paperwork for a transfer to another school district. Running away seemed easier than facing the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the teacher's lounge, the weight of a miracle that had slipped through our fingers. Rachel Matthews stopped calling. David buried himself in medical journals searching for scientific explanations. The community that had united in faith began to fracture, each person retreating into their private doubts. In my darkest moments, usually around 3 a.m. when the world felt thinnest, I would find myself talking to Catherine. Not praying, not really believing she could hear me, but needing to voice the pain that was eating me alive. "If you're really there," I would whisper, "if any of it was real, we need you now more than ever. Lily needs you. Sarah needs you. I need you." But no answer came. No scent of lavender, no gentle presence, no words of wisdom from beyond the veil. Just silence and doubt, and the growing fear that we had built our hopes on nothing more than grief and desperation. The darkness had won not through force or fear, but through the simple human capacity to doubt. It had poisoned not our bodies but our belief, turning the miracle we'd witnessed into a shared delusion we were all too eager to forget. And somewhere in the hospital, Sarah slept on, her monitors beeping steadily, while her best friend sat silent in a house full of fading memories, both of them lost in different kinds of darkness. The revelation came on the night I had finally decided to leave town. The moving boxes were packed, transfer papers signed, and I was making one last visit to Catherine's study to collect the remaining photographs when everything changed. It started with the electricity failing not just in our house, but across the entire neighborhood. In the sudden darkness, I heard Lily's footsteps running down the hall, but they stopped abruptly at the study door. When I turned to look, my breath caught in my throat. Catherine stood there more solid than in any previous appearance, with Lily held protectively in her arms. But this time she didn't smile. Her face carried an urgency I'd never seen before. "You're making the same mistake," she said, her voice sharp with disappointment. "The darkness didn't poison Sarah's body, it poisoned your faith. That was its plan all along." The room filled with images, projections of memories from that night in the church, but from a different perspective. We saw what the spirits had seen. The darkness hadn't attacked Sarah to harm her, but to make us doubt. "Watch," Catherine commanded, and the scenes shifted. We saw the being of false light retreat, but strands of shadow remained, wrapping around the minds of the adults who had witnessed everything. Each strand whispered doubts, suggested rational explanations, urged them to forget. "The coma isn't what's keeping Sarah asleep," Catherine explained. "Your collective doubt is. Every time you question what happened, every time you choose disbelief, you strengthen the barriers keeping her spirit from fully returning." Lily stepped forward, her eyes wide with understanding. "That's why I can still feel her, Daddy. She's trying to come back, but she needs us to believe again." Catherine moved to her old desk, where her diary lay open. The pages began to turn on their own, stopping at an entry I'd somehow missed. "The darkness knows it cannot defeat innocent faith directly. Instead, it targets the adults who should protect it. When they stop believing, their doubt becomes chains that bind the children's power." "But the crosses stopped glowing," I protested weakly. "The miracle stopped." Catherine's form flared with sudden intensity. "Did they stop, or did you stop seeing them? Look closer." She touched my eyes, and suddenly I could see what my doubt had hidden. The crosses hadn't gone dark, they were still shining, but our disbelief had created a film over our eyes, making us blind to the light. The children hadn't stopped having visions, we had stopped listening. The throne was never meant to hold darkness, Catherine revealed. It was meant to be a seat of pure faith, built by generations of believing hearts. The enemy twisted the vision, made you see horror where there should have been hope. She showed us one final vision: Sarah's spirit, still radiant with light, surrounded by a web of dark threads. But the threads weren't holding her captive, they were emanating from our own hearts, our own doubts. "The choice is still yours," Catherine said softly. "But understand what you're really choosing. When you pack those boxes, when you run from what happened, you're not just abandoning your home. You're abandoning Sarah. You're telling every child who dared to believe in something greater that adults can't be trusted to stand with them." Lily grabbed my hand, her small fingers trembling. "Daddy, I never stopped believing. I just stopped saying it because I thought you didn't want to hear it anymore." Catherine's presence began to fade, but her voice remained clear. The darkness didn't win that night in the church. It simply changed tactics. Now it's not trying to steal the children's faith, it's trying to steal yours. And you've been letting it. As her form dissolved into light, she left us with one final truth: the real miracle wasn't that we could reach across the veil, or that children could see angels. The real miracle was that adults could learn to believe like children again. Don't let the darkness take that away. The power returned, but the room remained illuminated by something more than electricity. In the soft light, I saw Lily's face shining with renewed purpose and felt my own doubts beginning to crack like ice in spring. We had been fighting the wrong battle all along, and it wasn't too late to start fighting the right one. Following Catherine's revelation, the truth about the children's power unfurled like a tapestry that had been there all along, waiting for us to truly see it. Pastor James called an emergency meeting at the church, but this time something was different. The children weren't just attendees, they were the leaders. Lily stood before the congregation, her voice clear and strong for the first time in weeks. "Sarah isn't lost," she announced. "She's been trying to show us something, but our doubt has been making us blind." One by one, other children stepped forward, each sharing pieces of a vision they'd been having but had been afraid to tell their doubting parents. They had all seen Sarah's spirit, radiant and aware, trapped not by darkness but by adult disbelief. "The throne isn't evil," a young boy named Tommy explained, drawing on the church wall with chalk that glowed with an inner light. "It's like a battery storing all our faith. The Dark One tried to corrupt it, but he couldn't. That's why he changed tactics." The children worked together, their chalk lines connecting and forming an image that took our breath away. The throne they drew wasn't made of suffering souls, but of pure light, each strand representing a connection between a child's faith and a mother's love. Rachel Matthews, who had been silent for so long, suddenly gasped. I can feel her, she whispered, touching her heart. Sarah's been trying to tell me something in my dreams, but I convinced myself it wasn't real. The children formed a circle, just as they had on that fateful night, but this time they invited the adults to join them. Your doubt is like a wall, Lily explained, taking my hand. But walls can be broken if you choose to see through them. As we joined hands, adult and child alternating in the circle, something extraordinary happened. The children's pure faith began to resonate with the forgotten belief in adult hearts. Like a key turning in a lock, our collective consciousness shifted. We could see it now, the web of light that connected all of us, the power of innocent faith amplified by adult understanding. The children hadn't needed us to protect them, they had needed us to believe with them. David Matthews, the skeptical doctor, broke down in tears. All this time he choked out, I've been measuring brain waves when I should have been measuring faith. The truth hit us like a wave. Our children's power had never diminished. Our doubt hadn't weakened their faith, it had only weakened our ability to witness it. They had been fighting all along, holding the line against darkness, while we adults retreated into comfortable skepticism. Through their eyes, we could finally see what Catherine had been preparing us for. The battle wasn't between good and evil in some distant spiritual realm. It was being fought in every moment we chose, between belief and doubt, between innocent faith and cynical reasoning. The throne isn't finished, the children told us, their voices harmonizing in that supernatural way we had almost forgotten. It needs both the pure faith of children and the conscious choice of adults to believe despite their doubts. Lily stepped into the center of the circle, holding Catherine's cross. Mom showed me, she said, her voice carrying that mix of childish simplicity and ancient wisdom. The darkness can't create, it can only corrupt. But we can create. Every time we choose to believe in something greater than our fears, we add another thread of light to the throne. As if in response, every cross in the room began to glow, not with the blinding light of that first night, but with a steady, warm radiance that felt like coming home. The children's artwork on the walls stirred to life, revealing the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. The throne was never meant to be a seat of power for darkness. It was meant to be a bridge, a connection point between innocent faith and mature belief, between the seen and unseen worlds, between the love of mothers living and beyond the veil. We had been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't about whether to believe in spite of doubt, but about choosing to believe because of love. And in that moment, as adult and child stood united in understanding, we felt Sarah's spirit stir, reaching for the bridge we were finally ready to build. The final battle came not with thunderous confrontation, but with the quiet power of unified belief. As dawn broke over our small town 3 days after our revelation, every church bell began to ring, not the ominous tolling of before, but a joyous peal that seemed to make the air itself vibrate with possibility. We gathered in Sarah's hospital room, the space impossibly accommodating the entire congregation. Children and adults joined hands, forming concentric circles around her bed. The darkness made one last attempt, manifesting as shadows that whispered doubts in our ears, but this time we were ready. Perfect love casts out fear, Lily declared, standing at Sarah's bedside with Catherine's cross glowing in her hand. One by one, the children began to sing not the ancient hymns of power, but simple songs of faith and love they had composed themselves. The adults joined in, our mature voices harmonizing with childish ones, creating something entirely new. Each note seemed to weave strands of light that formed a bridge between worlds. The shadows retreated, unable to maintain their hold in the face of such unified belief. Sarah's spirit, visible now to all of us, began to descend that bridge of light and song. Behind her came others, Catherine, generations of mothers, all adding their voices to our chorus. The monitors tracking Sarah's vital signs began to dance with patterns that defied medical explanation. The being of false light appeared one last time, its beautiful disguise now transparent to our awakened eyes. You cannot maintain this faith, it challenged. Doubt is the natural state of human hearts. But this time we understood the truth. Doubt isn't our natural state, I responded, holding Lily close. Love is, and love chooses to believe. Every blessed cross in the room blazed with light. The children's artwork on the walls glowed with realized prophecy, and Sarah's spirit, guided by her mother's love and her best friend's unwavering faith, finally found its way home. The moment her eyes opened, the room erupted in joy. But it was more than just happiness at one child's recovery. It was the celebration of a community that had learned to believe again, to see with both the innocence of children and the conscious choice of adults. The throne of light manifested one final time, but now we saw it clearly not a seat of power, but a bridge between worlds, between generations, between faith and understanding. It was built not of suffering, but of love, not of stolen innocence, but of freely given belief. Catherine's presence enveloped us all one last time, her voice carrying triumph and tender pride. This is what the darkness never understood. True power isn't in making others doubt, but in choosing to believe together. The morning light streamed through the hospital windows, casting no shadows. The battle was over, not because darkness had been banished, but because we had finally learned to carry our own light. 3 months after Sarah's awakening, our community gathered in the church garden for a very special dedication. The children had worked together to create a memorial not of stone or metal, but of living flowers. Catherine's roses bloomed impossibly in winter, arranged in a pattern that formed a throne of light when the sun hit them just right. Lily and Sarah, inseparable as ever, had become leaders among their peers. Their connection remained strong, but now it was a source of strength rather than fear. They taught other children how to see beyond the visible, while helping adults remember how to believe. The church basement, once our war room of supernatural evidence, became a gathering place where children and adults met to share stories, strengthen faith, and remember the truth we had learned, that belief isn't about denying doubt, but about choosing love despite it. Pastor James established a new tradition. Every Sunday, the service began with a simple question: what do you choose to believe today? The answers came from both children and adults, weaving together innocent faith and mature understanding. The blessed crosses remained active, though differently. Instead of glowing with supernatural light, they grew warm whenever someone nearby needed to be reminded they weren't alone. The children called them love alerts and took their role as bearers of these sacred reminders very seriously. Catherine's diary found a permanent home in the church library, along with journals contributed by others who had witnessed our journey. But more importantly, her message lived on in the way our community had transformed. Parents learned to listen when their children spoke of things beyond ordinary sight. Teachers incorporated both faith and reason into their lessons, understanding that truth often lay in the balance between both. Dr. Matthews even established a research foundation dedicated to studying the connection between spiritual and physical healing. The darkness never completely disappeared. It couldn't, as long as human hearts had the capacity to doubt. But we no longer feared it. We understood now that its presence gave us the opportunity to choose faith every day, to actively decide to believe in something greater than our fears. As for me, I found a new way to teach literature. Every story became an opportunity to explore the balance between innocent wonder and mature wisdom. My students learned that the most powerful magic isn't in fantasy, but in choosing to see the extraordinary within the ordinary. Lily still talks to her mother, and now I do too. Not with the desperate need of grief, but with the peaceful certainty of love that transcends death. The lavender in our garden blooms year-round, a gentle reminder that some bonds can never be broken. The throne of light remains, not as a physical structure, but as a living testament built of countless small choices to believe, to love, to hope. Each time someone chooses faith over fear, another thread of light is added to its eternal glow. And in the end, that was Catherine's greatest lesson, that the most powerful magic isn't in grand battles between good and evil, but in the daily choice to believe in love's endless light. What did you think of this tale of faith, love, and the power of innocent belief? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Did it remind you of any experiences where you had to choose between doubt and faith? Share your story with our growing community of believers. If this story touched your heart, please support our team by subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with friends and family. Every like and subscription helps us continue creating meaningful content that explores the extraordinary within the ordinary. Together, let's build a community where faith and understanding can flourish. Don't forget to hit that like button and join us on this journey of discovery.